Anya, and we are in the final furlong, getting towards and we've saved the best bits for last. And I won't talk about Derby, I'm talking about our brilliant panel and our brilliant guests that we've got ahead today. I thought I'd start by just giving them each an opportunity just to introduce themselves to you guys and a little bit of their background and experience. So I'll just start with Tony on my left.
Hello everyone, I'm Tony. I work with CRA Practice and Integrity for the past 2.5 years. Before that I worked with ING Bank as Head of IT and Risk, and we manage all the GRC type activities and services with our clients.
Hi all, my name is George Achlis. I'm a Senior Sales Solution Engineer for Rapid7. I've been with Rapid7 for a little bit less than a year, but I've been in the field for 20 years. My main responsibility is to solve customers' problems. So, yeah, very nice to meet you all.
So, hi everyone. My name is Matej, and I'm a CISO of Content.ai, which is a software as a service provider that provides headless CMS for customers. And my main responsibilities as a CISO, of course, would be security and also privacy. I also am a chair on the Responsible AI Committee and do lots of other stuff. So around 12 years in security and background in consulting, and it's my second CISO engagement. So that's me.
Hi everybody. My name is Jack Nagel. I am feeling quite old, actually. I've been around for well over 30 years. I used to work for Baltimore Technologies. I've variously worked with companies like McAfee, worked with Verizon for a long time, and I've been with DocuSign for over 4 years. So there's a kind of a link back to the Baltimore days of digital signing and things like that. I work in compliance and security architecture. And we offer, I think, a pretty well-known service of digital signing, but we're also fully compliant with the EU legislation on advanced signatures, qualified signatures. We're layering in artificial intelligence. Who isn't? I hear you cry. So we spend a lot of our days in my group threat modeling and ensuring that we stay straight with respect to the rules.
And last but not least, I'm Richard Dunn. I'm CISO of TU Dublin. My background is actually networking, Novell, which is showing me age. So I'm CISO for about the last 2 years. So in TU Dublin, we did a massive OD design, taking Talent Blanchardstown and DIT, which created a cyber and compliance group. So there are separate groups under my remit.
Brilliant, thank you all. And so as you can see, we've got a broad range of skills and expertise that I'm hoping that we can draw some real insights and have some great engaging conversations. And where we're going to take the conversation, well, across the topic today and into other areas, so focusing on everything from that kind of resilience perspective, but touching into AI. We could touch upon exposure, but where I'm going to start first is in and around the cloud. Brian talked about it. I think I mentioned it as well. It's probably been through a common theme throughout. There's that mass adoption that's still ongoing of the cloud, and what we also see is that organisations, they're going through the stages of I'm doing that first lift and shift up into the cloud, which is pretty much exactly as I'm running my operations and my systems right now, but just putting them in the cloud. And then we're seeing that, and particularly with a lot of conversations I have with customers, and I'm sure the panel will hopefully agree, that many organizations are going through that second phase of going, well, actually, now we want to take advantage of the cloud. We want to be cloud native, and we're switching our approach to that cloud native approach. So, Matty, I might start with you as the first question, knowing that Content.ai are purely a cloud, born in the cloud native based organization. And I suppose it'd be good if you can kind of talk through, how is that, and based on your previous experience as well, but how has that changed your approach to cybersecurity, particularly from a CISO perspective, in ensuring that you're secure and that you're able to understand that posture and maintain it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, from my perspective, it definitely brings you like a lot of freedom and a lot of I would say it simplifies your approach, because what you need to do, you can build from scratch, and you can basically build it the right way from the very beginning. So being cloud native and having that sort of a premise of our organizational approach, it's something that definitely streamlined our decisions. It made our security baseline stronger, because many things we could build cloud native, and things like zero trust could have been a consideration from the very beginning of our infrastructure as it was built. But it also, of course, brings a lot of challenges and a lot of reliance on the third parties, which is kind of obvious. But even on a, let's say, organization of a smaller scale, we are talking in terms of smaller hundreds of employees, it means that you have just a massive number of third parties that you have to manage, and massive number of suppliers that you suddenly have, and yeah, as you can never get rid of your accountability, you can only kind of delegate that responsibility. You need to be very mindful and very aware what you need to do, and you need to prioritize very much, because some of those suppliers you are critically reliant upon as an organization.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And Richard, I think I'm hoping that as an organisation, you've probably got a foot in both camps to a certain extent, or have gone through that transition into the cloud lift and shift. And
We have a foot
native
in all camps, so it only gives me pain. So we have a group of probably 70 technical specialists. But the problem we find is that as we've moved into kind of phase 2, we have an awful lot of SaaS applications and lift and shift into Azure. But the same person who's looking after the Azure systems is also looking after the on-premise systems. And it's not the same. The skill base in the cloud is quite different to on-premise. And it's hard to kind of migrate that person. And if you spend too much time in the cloud, they lose their skills for the on-domain local stuff. But we also found as well that as we move to the SaaS application, and we all know about the responsibility matrix, that we weren't really putting pressure on the vendors to align to our standards. We were dropping our standards to theirs in order to get the applications in, because it's much quicker, it's much faster, we can roll out applications quicker. And what we found is that with the compliance group and the GRC group, we kind of separated the security technical qualifications and then the GRC part. And until both are matched, it can't go in. So we brought data protection, GRC, and security, and all three need to kind of tick the box before it moves on to the next scale. So if something like password policy of the vendor is 8 characters, but ours is 14 and MFA, they have to match us before we let them in the door. I think that's brought increased trust with SaaS vendors as well, and they know that we're kind of on the ball, and we've looked at stuff before. So we do have a foot in everywhere. We have an awful lot of on-premise, physical cloud, or private cloud, and then SaaS, and it's merging it all together with a very small group of people is nothing but pain.
Yeah, and actually, just if I can sort of dive down into that a little bit more, sort of the small group of people and the challenge of actually, are we going to skill them in pure cloud or on-prem, or do you find that you've ended up having to double the amount of resources required rather than people being able to be that jack of all trades?
Yeah, I think jack of all trades, you'll end up making mistakes. They have to be able to focus and be an on-premise domain controller manager. So we went from 7 domains down to 1 domain. And when we looked at this maybe 2 years ago, we were kind of thinking, look, we'll put identity. We spent an awful lot of time and resources on identity. So that's our key to everything now in TU Dublin. But we did find that when we took the people from the on-domain into the cloud, there was gaps showing when we did reports. So we had to kind of push them back in. That's their skill base. That's what they're good at. And then look to fill the cloud, more cloud native people, and kind of bring in that's where, when you bring in the younger people in, you don't really need to get them looking at how to build, Cat5 cables, because 1, they don't know how to, and 2, they're naturally able to move faster in the cloud space. So it is, again, and then with dealing with the SaaS, that's where the GRC kind of circle comes in, and that's more of an audit role, and that's a different separate role. So the same person could do all 3, but they're not going to do it very well. So that's why we have those lines of demarcation.
Yeah, and actually talk about that, that they could do it all, but probably not well. I think it's the Gartner stat is that 99% of all breaches in the cloud will have a source of misconfiguration and user error. So, and George, I'd like to bring you into the conversation there of
Yeah, sure.
what should we be doing and putting in place to try and prevent those misconfigurations, there's mishaps from happening. I mean, we got back to Brian's talk first thing this morning, really about being one of the core exposures.
Well, the main thing is that we need to understand what we have to protect. We need loads of visibility. Ideally, we need to leverage the perks of living in 2024, which is unlimited processing power, which translates into automation. So ideally, you need a single pane of glass. Most of the organizations nowadays are multi-cloud. And this is why they need this single pane of glass in order to gain visibility throughout their resources. Obviously, they need to have a way to compare the existing configuration to compliance packs. And they also need to have the ability to utilize state-of-the-art technology in order to match the DevOps approach, things like controlling what is released on their cloud estate through controlling the code. So something like infrastructure as a code. So generally, we need to be open-minded and trying to approach the whole issue, first of all, through defining proper policies and procedures, and finding the proper frameworks that are matching our organization existence. And I think this is the main message that has to be delivered, right?
Yeah. Well, Joe, I'm glad you mentioned frameworks, because it means I can then come on to Tony. Tony, I mean, I suppose we've focused on, I suppose, the more technical security elements to a certain extent, and people and process. But from we move on to more of a compliance discussion. From a framework, how has cloud adoption? How has that affected, or has it even actually affected the use of like the ISO, the NIST, CSF, and have they changed? What's happening there?
Good question. I think ISO has definitely shifted with the 2022 version and updates. You can see there's introduction of cloud controls. Cloud security is a new control 523, I think it is. That's in there, but you've also got the ISO 27017 as well. So that's another paper specifically for cloud, but using the 27002 controls. So that's shifting. NIST, to a lesser extent, it never had its own control set. It always used informative references, typically ISO. So that's probably catching up a little bit. It's only out since January. We have yet to see which informative controls and references will be listed in that.
And Jack, I know when we spoke before, I think again from getting your sort of senior compliance manager's view on the impact of cloud with compliance, you saw it was quite positive. Or two different perspectives, actually.
Well, I suppose the thing is, showing my age, before I joined DocuSign, I worked as an ISO consultant with a startup that was entirely cloud native from the get-go. So infrastructure as code, cattle not pets, all this stuff. This was new vocabulary to me, to be honest. But what struck me was that properly implemented, you actually had a state of continuous compliance available. This is your pane of glass. I mean, it's possible to take a snapshot at any given time. Where it's difficult is if you're doing the lift and shift and you're trying to maintain a kind of hybrid environment. And, I've seen situations where actually some things must stay on premises, and that can really fly in the face of policy and can cause all sorts of problems. But from a pure policy perspective and compliance perspective, done properly, absolutely, it makes your life easier. You're actually harnessing the power of what in the old days we used to call utility models of computing.
Yeah, I suppose that nicely circles back to exactly where you started, Mate, in terms of being cloud native. There is a challenge, I suppose, with how do you get from one to the other. But in the interest of time, we'll leave that there in terms of cloud and move on to the sort of next topic that we want to touch upon, and that's really around the resilience aspect of cybersecurity and IT in general. And a lot of this, as we talked about this morning, is being driven by DORA, NIS2 that are coming into play. But I would say, from my perspective, that the core concepts there are important to every organisation, rather than just being those ones that come under that sort of regulation. But I suppose let's start with an audience question, actually, just as a view. How many, if you want to raise your hand, how many people in the audience fall under DORA or NIS2 as part of your organisation? And if you can keep your hands raised, of those who've got them raised, how many have completed their gap assessment and are completely comfortable with their remediation activities to get to the end of DORA 2? Or DORA, should I say? There's much less hands up. I think there's one or two over there that probably need a little badge and a special mention. But it's obviously clearly a challenge. So Tony, let's start there and sort of really outline what is DORA and why is it important?
It's important because it's law. ISO is an elective standard you can choose. And because it's law, you have to, by January 2025, you've got to be compliant with it. Now, it's unlikely that the national bodies will be knocking on your door in January, but you've got to be seriously considering conducting a gap assessment, most likely against the 5 main pillars of DORA. Now, the 5 main pillars are ICT risk management, ICT third-party risk management, incident reporting, resilience testing, digital resilience testing in the form of threat-led pen testing, and information sharing and intelligence sharing. So that's where your gap assessment is going to start. DORA itself, depending on scope, and it's not completely finalised, you could be facing up to 230, 400 requirements. So that's a challenge. But that scope is being finalised under these regulatory technical standards and implementation technical standards. So that's out there at the moment. There's for public consultation. It's supposed to be finished by May. So that hasn't landed. Now that represents the challenge. When that settles, then you can really finalise your scope and say we're in that 230 category or the 400. So that's out there at the moment.
Okay, so it
hasn't settled. It's likely to be extended to September by all accounts because the public consultation process hasn't completely finished.
Okay, excellent. And I suppose just obviously, I think of our panelists, I think no one falls directly in. Well, I suppose part of the DORA problem there is that it's this expanded scope beyond just financial services and ICT providers, so enforcing more people to become in scope for it. And I suppose if we just part the DORA element, then there's two part of it, regulatory compliance requirements. There's that need for operational resilience as part of our organisation. You touched on a few bits there. Part of it is around the that threat-led penetration testing and true red teaming. There's the instant response. I might come, Matt, just come to you first. I mean, are those things that you're focused on as part of your organisation and kind of see the true importance of those two?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, for example, like on us, the DORA would come as a supplier, right? In that kind of supply chain management setup, and it comes back to what I mentioned earlier about managing your suppliers and kind of really getting those priorities straight. And you probably spend a little bit more time in looking into contracts nowadays than than anything else. And so, but yeah, to your point, absolutely. Like you got a good start if you have already undergone like ISO, implementation of ISO requirements, ISO 27001 certification or 27017, as mentioned. If you have your basis right, if you have implemented, for example, in our case, we are provider, like software provider, so implemented privacy by default or security by default. Those are all good practices that will definitely help you along the way, and you can build upon that. So yeah, even though that some things are still unclear, which, for example, for the NIS2 as well, like we are still in many cases waiting for the local implementations to the law in the member countries. We need to appreciate that some of the things that are in those regulations are just commonly like best practice that has been there for a while.
And George, part of that operational resilience is around that ability to actively respond. I suppose from a Rapid7's point of view and from a vendor perspective, I wonder if you can talk us through just how you kind of see the market changing in terms of detection and response technology.
In terms of threat intelligence and keeping the business safe, yeah. So what we see is that there is a huge request/concern for an holistic digital risk protection. And what do we mean by this, right? So traditionally, there were frameworks like NIST, for example, that were dictating a specific way of responding to incidents. So you had to be well prepared, and you need to have some detection measures in place, analysis, containment, eradication, and lessons learned, right? So nowadays, most of the attacks and most of the threat actors are basically funded by countries, by states, and you need to take a step further. And in order to do this, first of all, you need muscle, you need great analysts with exposure to deep web, dark web, and clear web. And obviously, on top of this, you need state-of-the-art technology, which we nowadays achieve through machine learning and AI. And I think that these are the main things detection and response is basically focusing around. The majority of the customers out there are looking for safety, and the only way is to approach it through the digital risk protection approach.
Yeah, no, indeed. And you sort of talked about, we'll come on to AI in a second, but I suppose there's an important part, which is actually the people part of people, process, and technology. And Richard, perhaps if I can come to you to help and say, and I guess pose the question that, they're still very much a key part of our organisation. We haven't completely automated people out of all roles, security-wise. Yeah, not yet. Security or in natural day-to-day operation. But how do we make our people resilient, part of the solution rather than part of the problem?
It's interesting because we're building up a cyber team at the moment, and we're building a new SIEM and SOC team. So we've taken on a person about 3 or 4 months ago, and the funny thing is with the AI and the people is that the technology is doing some of the donkey work, for want of a better word, that he would have done 5 years ago. So because he's now coming in at, say, tier 3, and tier 1 and 2 is being done by AI, he's not actually appreciating the effort or the nuances that found that piece of information. So there is a worry that when we take these new people on this year and next year, that because technology has moved on to such a stage that they're just getting the nice dashboard, they're not spending the time in the weeds. So if they're not spending the time in the weeds picking up experience, they can never really get to that next level. So I think there is a balance of having technology, which, I mean, the AI we're using for SIEM and all that is amazing. You can sit there and look at it doing artifact collection and forensics, which we used to do a lot of, and it would take days to do, and now it's done in a couple of hours. Brilliant. But it's okay for me because I know how it did it. But when you have the people and you're trying to train new people into this area, you can't have them going in too high because you have to know the knowledge behind it. So I think there have to be a balance of people are going to have to still spend the time doing their apprenticeship, for want of a better word, and then appreciating that technology speeds up that apprenticeship maybe, but doesn't actually cut it out altogether.
Yeah, I don't know that is going to create. That's actually one of my thoughts, is that the AI is going to come in, and we'll jump onto AI in a bit more detail, but it's going to then make it extremely difficult for people to get into those roles because actually they're having to come in at a senior level because all the other bits are done for them. So how do you get that real experience? As I say, we know that a Cat 5 cable, that no cats were harmed in it, the creation of it, but some of those juniors coming in won't have that lower level sort of information. And I suppose that's from the analysts and from our security people. And Jack, I wonder if I can just come to you and throw a question away just on how you kind of see actually, the people as part of the wider organisation and keeping them, as part of that security.
Yeah, I suppose what's interesting is that while it may not be obvious, we actually are a regulated entity. We're not just a random vendor. We can't make the claims we make without having to jump through extremely rigorous audit processes all the time. So for trusted service provision under the IDAS regulation, which is the successor to the original Electronic Signatures Directive that I helped draft back in 1999. Anyway, part of the compliance posture includes people. So if you're ETSI compliant, the European Telecommunications Standardization Institute, that's a mouthful, you have to have strict rules about who you even hire into a trusted service provider. And that entity has to be freestanding and has to be autonomous within the organization, and also has to have financial firepower for things like indemnity. So it's kind of at the extreme end of living within a regulated world. And I don't think it's necessary for everybody to go that far, but it is a logical extreme which shows where you could go. And obviously you can begin with awareness creation programs and the human firewall and all that, but the more serious you're offering and the greater the risk, the more careful you have to be about how you actually allow people into certain zones, literally physical zones. Yeah. I mean, I've spent a lot of my life in cages in data centers, I hasten to add, not nightclubs. But I mean, even getting in, I mean, places with man traps, you know, these places exist, and without them, you don't really have trust.
But just to kind of go back to the people, I think I kind of got that question wrong. We have seen a benefit in training people, in awareness session. We did a few phishing campaigns last year. I'm not saying the percentage that failed, but it was off the scale. And we were like, my God, what do we, how could you not? And it was so simple. I failed for it as well because I thought it was somebody else. So we have done it again and again. We had webinars, flyers, turned up in places, went through them step by step. And the numbers have amazingly decreased, shockingly. So you can get you can't even say using now, people to improve their cyber hygiene if you give them the resources. So we did a website, spend a lot of money on it, and it does improve. And they are the first step, I have to say, if a company gets done by someone clicking on an email, the company has a lot more problems than, the fish that arised. But there is potential there with all users that they can actually pick up tricks. And we do see people contacting us saying, this is funny looking, even if it's Gmail, even if it's private, that it's their live training. We didn't do it in the company. You have to do this. We said, as a holistic in your life, if you get an email from Ticketmaster into your Gmail account, it looks funny, let us know. And we've had, people kind of bringing it into their daily life and coming back saying, oh yeah, my sister got a funny email, and I said to her, check it out. So people are a huge part of it, and we do forget them a bit. But there is more probably potential in that than there is in some technology.
Yeah, I completely agree. Actually, personalisation of it, so it becomes part of the day-to-day lives.
Yeah.
It's part of the culture of everything. It definitely does help. So if we jump into kind of really into AI now, and Ade, I might come to you first as content.ai. The clues in the name there that it's obviously a big part of what you guys do. I was wondering if you can kind of just talk us through, I suppose not the company secrets, but I suppose the approach to use of AI and how that's kind of challenged and how you've kind of handled that use, particularly as part of that being part of the responsible AI.
Yeah, absolutely. So for us, there's like, I would say, dual use of AI. So first of all, like we of course like kind of trying to incorporate that in our internal operation to streamline processes and kind of make the job easier for people. But at the same time, we are implementing that in our product portfolio, and it's being an integral part of what we offer to customers. And so what I will say is that coming back to what I mentioned before, like if you already have something in place which is like security by default, SDLC, properly defined for the products, for the product management, if you are integrating any AI technology, then you already have a good basis upon which you can build. But there are many specifics. I will say that the models that you pick, there can be dramatic differences in guardrails, in performance, in how responsible that model behaves and how reliable it is, and it also changes all the time. So I think that's another challenge. Pricing changes all the time, and so. The challenge is really to stay on top of that, trying to understand what is happening on the market, on the landscape, and being able to make dramatic changes to your operation. For example, exchanging one model to another, or like quickly testing and verifying a new model on a very fast pace. Because we just they just keep coming, and we need to really make quick decisions in order to stay on top of stay on top of the game.
Yeah, and is that creating sort of specific security challenges with that kind of fast changing and that you're having to react to on a constant basis?
Yeah, absolutely. It brings a lot of challenges in terms of how quickly we need to react, what kind of skill set we need to maintain internally, and also staying on top of all the industry best practices that are being created. Like we had, so just a year ago, there were just first frameworks coming out. Like there was a CAP AI, which was built upon like the early drafts of EU AI Act. Then the NIST AI RMF came, right? Yeah. So there that there have been, and today we have way more frameworks, way more tools, because as the field evolves, we need to be aware of all the compliance framework, all the tools, all the testing mechanisms that enable us to automate, and all of this is maturing quickly. So so I would say dedicate enough time and priority to this.
Yeah. And Richard, if I can come to you just on, so there's obviously a very clear opportunity and business benefit. But what would you see as, and I talked about the first thing this morning around my view on the overhyped sort of threat from AI, but in your organization, what is the feeling on what that real threat that you see from AI is?
Yeah, as a threat, I think like a university, the biggest threat is students filling in the exact same essay, 10 times. So there was a lecturer who just cancelled all the marks. He had 20 of the exact same. He gave a heading, look up paint today, and everybody gave the same in. I hope this finds you well. Blah blah blah. And he just cancelled the whole thing, gave him 24 hours to do it again. So there has been a lot of talk of using another AI that will look at the documents to see if it's been written by an AI. And now the students came back and said there's another AI that they use that makes it un-AIable, findable. So from an academic point of view, I think good ideas are still good ideas. We use generative AI a lot for doing reports. You get 60% and then you fix it up. But as a threat, from a cyber threat, I think it's just another threat. I mean, the same rules apply, the same frameworks are still in place. If you're being attacked by AI or script kiddie who are just running script 24/7, the difference, maybe I'm wrong in thinking, isn't humongously different. The same threat exists, and the same kind of, the same firewalls and things you have in place need to be in place. We've been using Copilot a little bit, and again, it's down to the word co, that it's not the pilot, that you still need to have the technical people that can understand what's happening, and it's being supplemented by AI instead of being replaced.
And George, I think if I come to you just on, again, getting that sort of vendor view on particularly how Rapid7 are making use of AI and sort of embedding in the technology to assist people.
Yeah, very good question. So we are basically AI customers. We are utilizing machine learning and AI for correlation and attribution in order to cut down the noise and reduce things like alert fatigue, which is something really common in SOC departments. And at the same time, we are helping organizations with compliance packages that are specific to machine learning and AI. Still, these resources that are spun up in the fluffy cloud need to maintain a specific security posture. So I would say that we are seriously involved in these two different perspectives, and we have the customer view, and at the same time, we have the security vendors view. I would say that it's one of the biggest challenges we will come across next year. And we also heard about the deep fakes. So this is another area of expertise we are focusing our research to. And great things are on the way.
Yeah, I definitely think deep fakes are they're already a threat, but they're up and coming one, because even when you're speaking to your bank, how do you authenticate who somebody is through their voice, how they look, and some of the information they know, which can be very quickly gathered, particularly from compromised information. Everyone's given their mother's maiden name and their first pet's name and the street they were born on and all that. So a lot of us out there, and I think that's going to be the hardest thing. So how do we authenticate that somebody who we can see and hear is actually who they're going to be overall?
Precisely. So,
yeah.
Sorry, I mean, this is the whole point about why we need proper digital risk protection. Attackers nowadays have access to all our data. Even if our phones are switched off, they're still transmitting signal. We all log into web pages, buy stuff. So all these things literally draw our picture. So we make it far easier for a malicious actor to target us. And this is where we should all be focused and be really, really alerted about any potential attacks. After all, human firewall is what saves strange situations.
So I'm running over slightly, but I'm going to carry on until someone waves me off. But one of the things I wanted to talk about, and it was mentioned already a couple of times, is really around sort of that supplier management. And Tony, sort of DORA, that's obviously a key part of it in terms of supplier management. So how does that kind of really, I suppose, impact like the critical ICT suppliers, and how should organisations be, looking to manage their third-party risk?
Yeah, I think DORA is calling out that fact that a lot of our departments, ICT departments, probably aren't that familiar with, doing risk assessments on their providers themselves. So you need to put together a third-party risk management framework, classification of your suppliers, put together a register, classify them, carve them up into, more critical versus less critical. Consult with departments like ourselves if you need to outsource it. Sometimes you can't do it yourself. Sometimes departments will lack the specialist capabilities in that space.
Yeah, and Jack, I know when we spoke before, you sort of talked about the approach that you have at DocuSign, particularly around the risk from SaaS-based organisations and using Stride to analyse.
Excuse me. We use well, first I should say one trick: make sure your mother has multiple maiden names, right? But we use a methodology developed by Microsoft, Stride, which is, we look for spoofing, tampering, repudiation, information disclosure, denial of service, elevation of privilege. It's, I'm not saying that it's 100% comprehensive, but when I get the third-party risk assessment email, because I get it all the time, I flag it to, I'm on a Slack channel, and, we put our hands up, I'll take this one, and we apply this methodology, amongst others, to try to figure out, well, what risk is posed by this organization, what could go wrong. And obviously, that's when we start looking for evidence of, penetration testing, have you got certificates? Basically, the stuff we have to go through, we look to see if others are doing the same thing. And that's where, I've heard people scoff at ISO certification, but what are you going to do if there's no certification there at all? So a lot of common sense. In a way, it's kind of operationalizing trust in a kind of hard sense. It's not just done in Bradstreet. It's not LexisNexis. I want to know what's happening operationally. Are you actually having penetration tests done on a regular basis? And if so, prove it to me, for example. And we do that. Yeah. Absolutely, we have to.
I suppose getting in the weeds is important rather than just a simple questionnaire every single time.
In fact, one thing there, but the ISO is, we kind of have a framework that we ask all questions, and almost most vendors will come back to saying, are you ISO 271 certified? And they say, our stuff is in Amazon, and they are. And you go, that means nothing to me. Is the company ISO? So I think even asking the questions, you need to even get back into the weeds deeper and say, what exactly is the scope? Is the scope what I'm buying from you, or is it scope from your Turkish office that's ISO certified? So I think you even need to get deeper into the weeds, which is more irritating, but it has to be done.
Yeah, like show me your scope and statement of applicability.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, do you know what? So I'm slowly creeping onto the stage to say we've run out of time. I would normally wrap up and give our panelists the opportunity to give one piece of advice. I can't do that now, but if you want to find them afterwards, I'm sure they'll be happy to give you one piece of advice based on their experience. So I'd just like to say thank you to our panel.